Welcome back to another episode of the Electric Election Road Trip and Podcast. I am your host for this episode, Benji Backer, President and Founder of the American Conservation Coalition and the Conservation Coalition, joined here by David Hardy, who is the President and COO of Ørsted Offshore, North America. David, it's great to be here. Tell us where we are and what you do for Ørsted.
Yeah, thanks, Benji. Thanks for inviting me out here. We're in beautiful Boston Commons Garden, right in downtown Boston on a beautiful sunny October afternoon. We're taking advantage of the great weather and making sure we have our safe COVID 6 feet, but let's hopefully have a good conversation. I can answer the second question. I am the President and COO of Ørsted Offshore North America, as you said, and I'm responsible for the development, construction, and operations of our wind farms here in North America.
Well, honestly, one of the highlights of my year, which, this year has been crazy, but one of the highlights of my year was touring this offshore wind facility off the shores of Block Island and just seeing the immense, just sheer awe of these 5 turbines that at construction were, what I learned, the largest in the world at the time, and they power the entire island of Block Island and 17,000 homes in Rhode Island, and it got the island off of diesel that was being shipped over on boats. I mean, it's just an incredible story. What is it like to be a part of that, and why is offshore wind so important, just to start out with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think maybe it's helpful to tell you a little bit about myself and my journey.
Yeah.
About 10, 11 years ago, I was working in high-tech industrial and had a good career path moving, and some circumstances led to me kind of looking for a new role, and I really thought about, what was I passionate about, and I kind of put my passions ahead of power or economic benefit, and I decided that I really wanted to pursue a career in renewable energy, and so I kind of was looking around at solar, wind, smart grid, et cetera, and ended up networking into the wind industry, and have spent, like I said, 11 years or so working in onshore wind around the world, probably built 15 gigawatts of wind farms in one form or another in probably 30 plus countries, and then I saw this offshore wind wave happening and wanted to be a part of it, especially in the U.S., because we're just at the beginning now. As you said, this wind farm you went and visited is 30 megawatts, 5 turbines, and it's amazing to see how big these turbines are and how meaningful this project is. But 30 megawatts is pretty small by big U.S. energy standards, and so we at Ørsted now. We have 3,000 megawatts of awarded contracts just in the U.S. that we're going to build over the next 2 to 4 years, and of course we're bidding on future projects and expect this market to really, really grow over time. So,
I mean, that's incredible. I mean, it seems like it's at the forefront of this incredible revolution that could happen in terms of growing the offshore wind kind of industry in the United States, but it seems like the United States is lagging behind in a lot of ways. We learned that Europe and Asia have really started to embrace this technology, and they've done it decades prior, and we're just getting started now, and it's also taking a long time to get these projects off the ground. Why has it been so difficult to get these projects off the ground, and why is the United States just starting to get into this, and how can we kind of reverse that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little context first. So you alluded to the fact that in Europe we have about 22,000 megawatts of offshore wind already, and in Asia even we have 7,000 megawatts, and Ørsted is the world's market leader. We have about 30% market share globally, so by the end of this year we'll have about 8,000 megawatts installed, roughly kind of 30% of that number, those numbers I just said. Plus we have the 30 megawatts here, which is the only operating wind farm in the US. But what you saw happening was the development of the technology and the development of the supply chain in Europe really start to drive the pricing down. And in Europe you have a very high density of population, right? And so although there's been pretty good growth in onshore wind and solar in different markets in Germany and Spain and other parts of Europe, you start to run out of land, quite frankly. And offshore is one of the places where you can really have a major impact, and you can really replace nuclear power plants or big coal plants with offshore. And offshore, the wind resource is also better, so you have with something called a capacity factor, is basically a synonym for efficiency. You have a much higher capacity factor in offshore, and it becomes a lot less intermittent than onshore renewables. The turbine technologies also makes for higher reliability as well. So you have this conflux of things happening. You have, the EU, climate action plan for 2020. You have the price coming down. You have, big demand in Europe on the coast, and quite frankly on the east coast of the U.S., which is what's driving demand here. And quite frankly, there's a lot of economic benefits from offshore wind as well. I mean, I have a very conservative father-in-law, and he kind of sometimes teases me about the price of offshore wind, and I tell him, like, hey, we can make it cheaper, but we're building ports, we're building factories, we're hiring, we're training workforces, we're doing research. So a lot of the cost right now is in the startup of this new industry, but the prices will come down. You can see already in onshore solar, onshore wind, the game is over compared to fossil fuel. Coal and natural gas, onshore renewables are already on par or beating those solutions, and offshore is just a little bit behind on the cost curve, and we'll get there. But we bring the advantage of scale. We can really put a lot of megawatts in the water near the load centers of the U.S. East Coast. Philly, New York. Boston, etc. So it's going to be explosive for sure.
Well, getting those projects off the ground, we were learning that there was, a 7-year permitting process?
Right now, the projects are sitting out in federal waters, and so you've got this federal NEPA process that we have to go through, and it's arduous. I mean, it's probably for the good of the environment that we're making sure everything works, but we have to spend a year or two at least doing surveys and building what's called a COP plan, our construction and operation plan. And we produce a stack of paper, yay thick, with consultants and our own engineers, and then we submit that to the federal agency. They review this COP application. First, they kind of review it for completeness, and that's supposed to take around 6 months, and then it's at least a 2-year process where they review the application and they engage with stakeholders, and then they eventually can give you your federal permit. And the challenge has been that right now there's no commercial scale offshore wind farms in America, even though there's 6,000 megawatts of wind farms that have awarded power offtake from the states. No federal permit has been granted yet. So one of our competitors, Vineyard Wind, is hopefully very close to the end. We hope by the end of the year they'll be the first large-scale project to have a federal permit. But after that, it's a very slow process, and so some of our permit applications we put in a year ago, and we haven't even started that 2-year clock yet. So.
Wow. So do you think that can go faster once this technology is put into place a little bit more rapidly in terms of like more companies doing it, more projects happening? Do you think that process can speed up, or do you think it's always going to be that difficult to get these projects off the ground?
In fairness to the government, I think they wanted to do it right. So the offshore wind in the U.S. kind of picked up faster than people expected, and so they kind of put a pause on the federal permitting process in order to do what's called a cumulative impact study. So they wanted to see not just what's the impact of this one wind farm, but what's the impact of the cumulative effect of all these wind farms. And so even the federal government right now is assuming, I think in that study they assumed 22 gigawatts, so 22,000 megawatts of wind between now and like 2030 or 2035. Wow. So they expect a lot of power to come on, and they wanted to do this cumulative review, and they submitted kind of preliminary feedback on the cumulative study in June. And then we were hopeful that once that cumulative impact was evaluated, that they would restart the permitting process for everybody that's in the queue. And we at Ørsted, we have the number 1, 2, and 4 queue positions, so we're anxious to get our projects started in this federal NEPA process. But right now we haven't restarted yet, and there's still some discussion about wanting to see the full cumulative impact study come to a conclusion before starting any new federal permitting. Back to your question, I think once the process gets started, once we've got some ground rules from the first 1 or 2 projects, then everyone will kind of conform, and hopefully it's easier for the federal government to do its studies, and they're just looking for individual project deviations, but we've got a bunch of standards, already in place. So.
Well, that makes sense that they're thinking about that in depth. And then on that similar note, there's kind of the stereotype, and we talked about it on the tour, but there's a stereotype that offshore wind or wind in general is really harmful to the natural world in terms of the marine life and the bird life. And you guys are doing a lot to study that. Can you talk a little bit about why that stereotype is or isn't true, and then also what you're doing to combat it?
Yeah, first, not to be too cheeky, but coal emissions are also pretty bad for the wildlife. So, I think
it's a very fair point.
In general, we're pretty proud of the fact that we're producing clean, renewable energy through our wind farms. But there for sure needs to be a full study of the environmental impacts to sea life, other marine users, et cetera, ocean users, et cetera. And this COP process that I described, it's very, very robust. We do like 2 years worth of studies before we even submit the application. And of course, we're following all the guidelines, and we're investing heavily. We've got partnerships, for example, with URI and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, and the state of New Jersey University, and a few other academic institutions where we're investing in new technology to do like passive monitoring, for example, of the right whales, Atlantic right whales, which are endangered species up in this part of the ocean. And we take all these environmental concerns like very, very seriously. This is our core business, so
right.
we want to do very sustainable wind development. It doesn't do us any good to build one wind farm and do it in a cheap way and kind of abuse the environment. We want to be building wind farms for the next 20, 30 years. So we take all this environmental impact very, very seriously, and we've got marine biologists on our staff. We've got a huge marine affairs organization that's talking to fishermen, and we're really trying to be a partner in the ocean and just bring this technology to bear in a smart and sustainable way.
Well, it was really impressive to see when we were out there actually how the wind facility was housing marine life. I mean, there were we were learning about the schools of fish that really enjoy being around it. We were seeing birds like sitting and living on the wind turbines, and it just was very much the opposite of what you oftentimes hear. And of course, there's always a trade-off with every energy source, and so that, to your point, is very, very much a fair thing to think about. But I was really surprised, and our Brian, the manager, talked about how there's really minimal impacts on the environment out there in terms of the natural world, and that you guys are doing some incredible studying with innovative technology to look at bird migration patterns and studying that. And what has been found is that there really isn't much of an impact on the animal life, and then on top of that, you have 100% renewable energy. So, kind of with that stereotype, and it's. I mean, you said you have a father-in-law that might even have that stereotype. I don't know if he does, but when you hear people say bird graveyards, or they say these things that aren't true, where do you think that comes from? And is there a way to really prove to people that this isn't that bad on the natural world, and actually it's got a huge net positive?
Yeah, I mean, for sure the science points to the opposite. I mean, we do tons and tons of scientific study on birds, on marine impact, on fish impact, and the science for sure points to the fact that there's not a meaningful negative impact on marine life or on other animal life, etc. We probably need to do a better job getting our message out, because I think sometimes people just they just don't know, and they hear things, and there's people who are against it for whatever reason, economic reasons or other things, and they propagate some of these falsehoods. I think you see it on the onshore side, you definitely see it on the offshore side, but we try to let the data speak, and
right.
So when we're in discussions with permitting agencies or with the fishermen, we bring the data and show them the facts basically. And as you said, we found that Block Island now has been in operation for 4 years, and we found that the sport fishermen love it. I mean, life is better now. They're catching.
We were taken out by a sport fisherman who loves it.
Stripers, more bluefish. The sport fishing has gone up. Not to mention tourism. People are not dissuaded at all. Being on the beaches at Block Island, and people even go out on boat tours. Through to see the wind farms, and so there's just a lot of misinformation out there. I think that we've got to work on combating through our communications and PR work.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, and I think that PR and comms part is really important, but it also takes people in politics to be telling the truth about it, right? And I think that matters a lot. To switch gears for a second, we learned on the tour that it was a Republican governor at the state level who thought that it would be a great idea to do this project off the coast of Rhode Island, and he worked with the company and the local community, and it was like this awesome public-private partnership with both sides of the aisle being engaged, and now it's an incredibly successful project. The island is bought in, the mainland is bought in, the region's bought in because it's reaping the benefits, and then of course I'm sure the state government's happy about it and the company's happy about it. Can you talk a little bit about how that process worked? I know that was before you came to Ørsted, but can you talk a little bit about that process and also the importance of kind of this public-private partnership and working across those different industries to get something like this done?
Yeah, it's really a great question. My opinion, offshore wind shouldn't be a partisan thing. I mean, I think sometimes people think it's like, this green, tree hugging kind of thing. The fact of the matter is we talked about already. It's economically viable, from the price of power, coming down over time.
Stable power prices, which was a problem from what I heard.
For sure, in these agreements that we're making with the states, we give a fixed price for 25 years, so they have no risk to inflation. They have no risk to commodities, etc. It's very stable. Second is the job creation part of it. Whether you're leaning left or right, I'm indifferent on that. But you can't deny the economic benefits of a new industry to the U.S. and the jobs that are going to be created. And this isn't just any old job. This is like infrastructure. We're building ports. We're producing, heavy. We need to build specialized ships. So ports. We're building offshore structures. So it's not just the states where the wind farms are going to be built, but we're going to leverage Gulf Coast, fabricators in Texas and Louisiana that have worked in oil and gas offshore. They can now build offshore structures for the offshore wind industry, and those parts of the country are predominantly a little more conservative than maybe other parts of the country where the wind farms are being built. And then, like I said, the steel for the towers and monopiles will eventually probably come from steel mills in the Midwest, and there's cement, and there's other metal fabricating work, and eventually we'll get the full supply chain over here where we're building the big nacelles with gearboxes and electric generators and all that activity. So it's not a partisan thing, really. I mean, we're talking about good for the environment, good economic benefits, infrastructure. We're doing a ton of port infrastructure and other works to bring up to revitalize places that are underprivileged right now and kind of bring new economic benefits there. On the public-private partnership side, it definitely right now is being driven primarily by the states, and the states are in one form or another kind of contributing. Of course, in some cases, they're probably paying a little bit higher power price than they would otherwise have to in order to bring this industry to bear, but also to bring the economic benefits to their
And it's
state.
a long-term investment.
Yeah, so they're making the investment now to pull in the supply chain, and then over time, just like in Europe, when the prices come down, then it's just all plus, plus, plus. I think Block Island was even more unique, because of the the 5 diesels and the fact they weren't even connected to the grid onshore. So they were totally on an island out there, electric island as well, totally reliant on the diesel generators. Now they're actually connected by a wire by a cable back to Rhode Island. And so the wind farms actually produce all the power for Rhode Island, but they also produce power back to the state of Rhode Island. And in cases where there's no wind, the power flows the other way.
Right.
They've got internet that they never had before. They've got other benefits, and quite frankly, we paid for that. We dredged the line, we put the cable in, etc. So and there's a lot of those kind of soft benefits that come from offshore wind. So
well, and it sounds like the island has really been bought into the process, and they are really excited about the benefits and the lower energy prices, the jobs that have been created, the stability, with things like Wi-Fi or energy prices in general. I mean, those are important things to communities, especially now. And to be a vibrant community for tourism or for whatever, which Block Island obviously relies on tourism a lot, you need to have those, simple things like good Wi-Fi, low energy prices, reliable energy in general. It sounded like when there was a storm, like they were still, for 3 days, they were still able to get the power that they needed. And that's something that you oftentimes see publicly as a little bit overlooked, I think, when it comes to wind power. I mean, we've traveled across the country on this electric collection road trip, and we've seen Midwestern, farmers and, business people just so enthusiastic about the potential of wind in their communities. And that's obviously at a much smaller scale, but they know the economic benefit, they know the environmental benefit. And you see that, 3 of the top 5 wind states are conservative states. And obviously, there's a Republican governor in Rhode Island, and, Democrats are embracing it here too. So it's got this potential to be bipartisan.
Yeah, we're building a project in Maryland right now. It's got a Republican governor in Maryland as well who's generally supportive of offshore wind. And so I think, again, I don't think this should be a partisan thing. I think the economic benefits and the environmental benefits, speak for themselves.
So to scale this, what is the potential of the scale of offshore wind for the United States in layman's terms? And then also, what is the biggest barrier to getting there?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the long term, it's going to happen, right? It's kind of inevitable because you don't have other options, really. Offshore is already the fastest growing renewable sector. You start to see already adjacencies in Europe where they're building now green hydrogen from the offshore wind. Ørsted actually, we just announced a green ammonia project. Ammonia is used as a fertilizer, and now you can produce it, in a green way. And so there's all these adjacencies that will come. But just in the U.S. on the East Coast, I think it's, there's different studies, but it's predicted that there would be like 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, 2035 maybe.
And do you know approximately what that would power?
Yeah, it's a good question.
A ballpark.
We say that our 8 gigawatts are powering 15 million homes. So 3 to 4 times that.
We'll do the math afterwards.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so, I mean, it could be a super meaningful contributor to the overall energy grid.
And that's massive.
Yeah. And the other point is, we talk about, I'm not afraid to say the price is a little bit high now, but when we talk about the price being high, let me give you a little context again for layman's term. In New York, NYSERDA is the government agency that's kind of administering their offshore wind program. They've awarded 1,700 megawatts, so 1,700 megawatts of offshore wind, and they've calculated that with the awards they've already given, that it's about 79 cents per household of increase for offshore wind. So 79 cents.
3 gumballs.
Yeah, 79 cents a month. I don't know. That's a third of a Starbucks coffee, or 1 Dunkin' Donut, or depending on what your passion is.
Are Dunkin' Donuts that cheap?
We're not putting a big burden on households, right? And this is the worst it's going to be, right? It's only going to go down from here. So I think it's a good investment for the country and for these states, and I think these governors see that. They see the jobs, especially now with COVID. It's a massive opportunity. So.
And then what's the biggest barrier to seeing that impact to what the potential could be?
Yeah, I mean, again, I started to answer this, and you're right, I got distracted. But
was it the geese in the background, or?
The long run, we think it's going to happen. In the short term, it's basically this federal permitting. You know, the challenge is that this is expensive stuff. You know, we've got to invest a lot to build these projects. And the difference between a conventional fossil power plant is the capex, the capital expense that you put in is kind of half the cost, and then you have fuel for the whole rest of the life of the power plant. In our case, we have no fuel, so the capex is really high price, and in order to make that investment in the capex, you got to have certainty that the projects are going to go. We're you know, and then on top of that, we're doing the port infrastructure, the supply chain development. So we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. We're building ships. We're doing all this stuff. I think there was a statement recently that there's $166 billion of economic benefit tied up right now on hold, waiting for permitting certainty. And as soon as we have permitting certainty, we'll start writing the checks and we'll start moving all these things forward. But of course, it doesn't make sense. It's not prudent for a business to spend millions of dollars and then nothing happened, and you just crumble those dollar bills up and light them on fire. So we're trying to find that balance of keeping this industry moving forward, but doing it in a prudent way until we have more certainty around the federal permitting process.
Well, it seems like yes, there needs to be a permitting process, and yes, there needs to be oversight on it, but it seems like this kind of long-term process is oftentimes redundant in certain ways, and that there's probably ways to streamline it, especially once more projects get off the ground and you can see what works and what doesn't work, and where there needs to be attention given and where there doesn't need to be attention given. But the fact that that's the biggest hurdle means that there needs to be some improvement there at some point. And we have a dog friend here. That's gonna be the best part of this podcast for sure. So we are running out of time, and I think the dog was our warning. But cue the dog. We have this at every podcast. Don't worry about it. I do want to ask, what's something that you wish people knew about either the wind industry or the offshore wind industry that they might not know?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think when I talk to people, I always highlight. It depends who I'm talking to, but I mean, first off, it's going to be huge. That's one thing that everybody needs to understand. And we're building these wind farms, pretty far offshore. There may be some small visual impact on the horizon. They're definitely not as close as those Block Island wind farms as you saw. On average, 20 miles or so offshore. And we just have all this resource out there. So you have all this potential. But I really think the thing that I explain to people is the amount of kind of soft benefits that we're bringing. We're not just building clean, green, renewable energy offshore. This port infrastructure, the supply chain development, we have these local benefits plans where we're investing in training programs. We're investing in in communities that are affected by the onshore cable route, and it really adds up to a lot. So we're doing more than just creating green energy. We're actually doing a lot to improve the infrastructure and livelihood of these communities that are going to be affected by or impacted by the offshore wind. And we're creating operation and maintenance hubs, we're creating piers, we're building ships. And so it's just so much more than just the wind farm sitting offshore. There's just so much more that we're doing. And look, this is one of the few new American industries that we can point to that could be a massive impact on our society, and where the U.S. could be a leader. Right now we're definitely a lagger, but we need energy independence. We need to be a leader on the benefits of clean energy from the global warming standpoint. Whether you're way into that or not, it still
matters.
It still matters, and then it's just it's a great economic benefit.
I actually think that the fact that the first time that climate change got brought up, being this far into it, shows that there are so many other benefits. Like, we didn't even talk about the benefit to climate. We were talking about the economic benefit, the other environmental benefits, the job. We were talking about all these other benefits, and we totally even forgot about the massive benefit that it has to climate change. And I just think that it speaks to the power of offshore wind, and I mean, I think as an organization, we've always been really excited about the potential for this, but now that I had the opportunity with the team to go up close and see it, feel the passion of the people in the community, whether that was the project manager who helped showcase it to us, or the sports fisherman that showed us it, and he was just all about it. He said this is one of his favorite things to do, is tour the wind farm, and he's a sports fisherman. Like, his favorite thing to do should be bringing me out to fish, and it was actually to show the windmills. Like, that speaks to the power of this opportunity. So it was just an honor to be able to go out there. I'm really thankful that it got set up, and it was the highlight of this road trip so far, and it was on a boat, which, you know, was not even planned for the road trip. But as we're going across the country, we still have about half of this trip left. What do you hope we see?
Well, I mean, I hope you see that offshore wind is a big important part of it, but it's part of a whole movement, I think. And Ørsted, you know, I'm the president CEO of the offshore business, but we do onshore wind, onshore solar, we do storage. I already highlighted we're doing green hydrogen, we're doing green ammonia. So we see this as the future. And, you know, in 2009, about 85% of Ørsted's business was fossil fuel related. And
really?
Today, you know, 11-ish years later, it's less than 10%. So
wow, that is a fascinating statistic.
The company made a massive transition from being a fossil fuel company to we call it a green super major. And now you see Shell is in offshore wind, BP just made over $1 billion investment in US offshore wind. So I hope that you see this tidal wave. Like, if you're a Malcolm Gladwell guy, like the tipping point, we're past the tipping point. There's no debate really about is it the right thing. I hope that you start to see that the tipping point is already passed. And that, you know, this is our future, and it's massive. And, you know, I think I made the right call 10, 11 years ago when I decided to transition into renewable energy. And just to come back to that, I mean, it's a triple bottom line kind of idea, right? You can make a good living, you can do good for the environment, and I forgot what the third triple bottom line is, but
I think there's like 7 in this case, but
yeah. But in any case, I mean, it's, you know, you don't have to compromise, basically, right? There's a lot of good here. So.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. I want to just say that I'm incredibly impressed by the work you're doing here at Ørsted. And I think, and now we've got a helicopter. You know, it's perfect because once the helicopter's gone, there are no more geese behind us, and there's going to be no noise once we leave, and that's just how it is. But
wait, I have to say one thing. Do you see the wind blowing and feel the wind? This is just raw power right here.
And where are the offshore wind turbines in this pond? Yeah. I hope they're there by the time I get back.
Yeah, it'll work.
But I do want to thank you for your work, and it is really exciting. You guys are investing in the future, not just, you know, of the environment, but of the economy. Young people should take notice because this is an amazing industry to get involved with. Super honored to have had the opportunity, and can't wait to see kind of these next projects get online and the next steps being taken here. You're right, America needs to be a leader. We can't be a follower any longer on this, and there's immense benefits to not being a follower, so let's do it. And ACC and TCC will be there every step of the way. So I appreciate you, David, appreciate Ørsted, and I want to thank our viewers for watching another episode of the Electric Election Road Trip. I hope you enjoyed the B-roll from our awesome tour on the boat, and honestly, check out Ørsted's work, check out the movement for offshore wind, because it's the Electric Election Road Trip, and offshore wind has been one of the main highlights already halfway into the tour. So really thankful. Ørsted, thank you again, and can't wait for the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Benji.